Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Henson with NI, and we are excited to have you join us for Learning LabVIEW, beginner to advanced, and we're going to get a nice orientation from experts. And I am absolutely thrilled to have with us today Mark Ridgely, Quentin Aldridge, and Chris Cellino. And I'll be introducing each one of them as they are going to be our panelists and have a lot of valuable experience to bring to the table here. So as we get started, I want to introduce, before I introduce Chris, I just want to let you guys know who I am. Nancy Henson. I taught my first LabVIEW class in 1989. Of course, I was 5 years old at the time and I was a child prodigy. And I've been in the LabVIEW community, either working for NI or working as a partner, a consultant, and instructor for the last couple of decades, and I am currently our head of developer relations for NI, and it's the best job in the company because I get to spend time with my favorite developers. So Chris Cellino, I've known you for decades. You have been at NI, you're at a partner, you're a LabVIEW champion. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and in particular, if you could bring up a fun fact about you.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, everybody. My name, like I said, is Chris Cellino. I work at DMC. I'm a senior project engineer. Been a LabVIEW champion. I'm the founder and president of G Central. I get to serve on the board with Quentin actually over here, which is just, it's amazing. And I've been a CLA. I've been doing LabVIEW for upwards of 20 years. I have a real passion for seeing people learn and collaborate, which is why I'm so thrilled about being on this panel. And a fun fact about me, I love food. I love food. As a matter of fact, my cousin and I will actually plan vacations, not in terms of the destination like a city, but rather a specific restaurant in the city. So we pick the restaurant, we get the reservation, and then we find the hotel and we book our airfare and all that kind of great stuff. So yeah, I like food too much. We'll just say that. That's
awesome. Now I know where to go for restaurant picks. Wonderful.
Right.
Excellent. Q, tell us a little bit about yourself. I've known Q for years, and you started the LabVIEW Center of Excellence when you were running a team at Hill Air Force Base. You did a fantastic job. You're a LabVIEW champion and the master of Q controls. So I'll let you share a little bit more about yourself and your fun fact.
Okay, well, first off, I go by Q because I'm a big Star Trek fan and my brothers called me that. And then my first job out of school, I made all of the cool stuff that made the technician's job easier in our test group. So I got named Q by them because of the James Bond reference. So that's maybe a fun fact, but maybe not the fun fact. I'll share another one a little later. But yeah, I've had a number of jobs. First out at ATK, which is now owned by Northrop Grumman, and later at Hill Air Force Base, and now I work for Tesseract. Had a friend of mine that started that company that gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I'm happy to be there working for them now. And yeah, I've been doing LabVIEW since ATK, so about 15 years or so now, and yeah, I really like it. My fun fact, I'll share another one, is I'm a big Harry Potter fan as well, and I'm in Ravenclaw. So, and my whole family, I have 2 daughters and my wife, and we're all in each a different house. So if you don't know the houses from Harry Potter, there's Ravenclaw, and then Hufflepuff is my wife. And then my older daughter is in Gryffindor and my younger daughter is in Slytherin. So that makes it kind of fun. We have a little rivalry between our houses in my own house.
I love that. I need to catch up on my reading and movie watching, definitely. And so next we have Mark Ridgely. And Mark, I think the first time you and I met was at a LabVIEW Developer Days event, and you were presenting on code smells in LabVIEW, and it was absolutely fantastic. You had just phenomenal engagement with the group, and you're probably our most seasoned, prolific instructor. In fact, I think you're probably instructing this week as well, and you are a LabVIEW champion. So Mark, share with us a little bit more about yourself.
All right, well, thanks, Nancy. It's great to be a part of this team. here today. Happy to be invited to participate here. My name is Mark Ridgely. I'm the owner of Radius Technologies LLC, which is an NI Alliance partner company. And I do specialize in doing NI training courses for customers all across the continental US. And when I'm not doing that, I do project/consulting work for other customers. So it has been a long journey for me. Started using LabVIEW back in the late 80s, early 90s, and been using it ever since. Been teaching it just about as long. I actually started teaching it about a year after I learned it, and I just gravitated towards it and been going full force. So anybody that kind of follows me, they kind of know that I do travel quite a bit to do the teaching, so much so this ties in with my fun fact, which is that I live on a golf course, but I only play golf perhaps once every 5 years. And people ask me why, and it's like, I like, just like the environment. It's really quiet. When I'm home, I want to relax. And that was what some people would say, well, you're never home, like, well, yeah. But when I am there, I like to be relaxed. So that's the environment that I get from that. So that's my fun fact.
So great. So then I can invite myself over, and then I get to use your golf membership and go play 9 holes. So that'll be great.
You could. That's what I was telling the other people, is that that's the only time I play, is when somebody I know wants to come play at the course I live on. I'll usually go out there and hit some worm burners, as I call them.
Excellent. Yep. So for everyone that's joining us today, again, welcome. And we're going to really hit 4 topics somewhat sequentially during this time. We're going to kick off with about some anecdotes about how each of us learned LabVIEW and what was missing when we were learning LabVIEW. We'll get into a little bit about what are the best tools out there for learning LabVIEW. Then we're also going to talk a little bit about what is it that's unique about LabVIEW as a language that makes learning LabVIEW and learning system engineering different. And we're going to conclude with a little bit about the community and the involvement that the community has in our learning process. So we want to start off with how each one of us learned LabVIEW. And one of the things I want to touch on is, what do we have today that we didn't have when we were learning LabVIEW? So it is true, I was learning LabVIEW in 1989. And at the time, LabVIEW was actually black and white, and it was not colored. And when you wanted to move an icon, you had to disconnect the icon and delete all the wires. Then you moved the icon, and then you wired it back together again. So we didn't have the wires following the icons, and we also didn't have the internet, and that has made things so much better. So Q, I want to turn this over to you, because you worked on some very interesting projects as your first LabVIEW project. So tell me a little bit about you learning LabVIEW and what was missing when you were learning LabVIEW.
Okay. So yeah, right out of school, I was hired on by ATK, and specifically to their mechanical test lab. And they had 2 labs. One to test all the inert materials, so rubbers and steel and insulation and stuff. And then they had a live lab that actually tested the solid rocket propellant. So it's kind of interesting to think that you need to know the mechanical characteristics of solid rocket propellant. But you do this because you want to make sure that it's not going to crack or something, where you don't want it to, where it creates more surface area to burn, which creates problems with solid rockets. So when I started out there, they sent me to all of the LabVIEW training. I attended, I think, what was called LabVIEW Basic 1 and 2 back then, and Intermediate 1 and 2. And yeah, I think the training was a great front door for me. And then my first project, it's always good to, as soon as you learn it, to dive right into a project, so that you can start practicing it. And my first project that I started doing was actually not for the actual testing. It was to track materials. So in this live lab, they could only have so many pounds of solid rocket propellant per room for safety reasons. If something were to happen, they don't want the whole thing to go up. So the the first thing I tracked was an info screen that we would have up and visible in the hallway, and it would show a map of the building, and then we had barcode readers at the door of each door into each room that you would scan the material in, and then it would basically the LabVIEW program would update the database saying, okay, this is being checked into this room, and then it would show up on the screen, okay, how many pounds, because that sample had, you know, how much was in that sample. It would add it all together and display that on the screen. And it would also give you like siren warnings and stuff if you tried to check something in that made it so that it was over the amount. And so that was my first LabVIEW program. My first real big project that I did in LabVIEW. And as far as answering the question, you know, what did I lack? I found at a point where, you know, I had gone through the training, I had done several projects, and now I just wanted to go learn, well, what else is there in LabVIEW? What don't I know? You know, and that's a hard question to ask, you know, because you can't ask the question if you don't know the question, you know. So I remember just Googling random LabVIEW terms and trying to find resources on the internet. And, you know, I mean, there was the forums, but I don't know if they were as developed back then. The LabVIEW wiki existed, but it wasn't very fulfilled. And actually, the LabVIEW wiki went away for a time. And we can talk a little more about, you know, my efforts when I came LabVIEW champion. I started trying to push to bring it back, and we brought it back, and have since put a lot more effort into filling it out with a lot more information. But that's what I thought was lacking, was I just didn't know how to find out more about what I didn't know about.
Yeah, it's the classic question of I don't know what I need to know, and the importance of having that mentor out there. And we'll get to some of that when we start talking about all the learning details and how to learn LabVIEW.
And it was
yeah.
and it was probably a lot about trying to learn more about frameworks and structures and starting to create larger programs that I didn't know how to ask those questions. So
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because, you know, in the LabVIEW community, when we were all first learning LabVIEW years ago, we were creating the best practices for this language. And then as new concepts came out within programming in general, like object-oriented programming, then how do we best do that in LabVIEW? And so it's nice to be at the stage where when someone's onboarding today, we do have a lot of fantastic frameworks. We have the guidance. We can get someone from beginner to advanced much more quickly. I mean, you still have to do the hard work to master things, but we definitely have better resources right now. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about how you learned LabVIEW, and you and Q are definitely very involved in providing these extra resources through G Central, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But what was your learning experience like, and what was missing?
Yeah, I learned LabVIEW through the School of Hard Knocks. So there wasn't necessarily a project that I was working on at work. My first job was at a pretty small startup where I first understood just the notion of programming at all through Visual Basic for applications with Excel. And we had hired somebody from NI to come and automate a test system. So he sat down with me and he said, Chris, just tell me what the computer needs to do and I'll write the LabVIEW code. And I was like, okay, cool. So he was very generous with his knowledge and actually showed me right in front of me, you can make LabVIEW do this and that. And this notion of dragging and dropping and graphical representation, I don't know how to say this other than it just made sense to me. I've tried to learn other programming languages, and I've never been officially diagnosed or have been notified that I'm dyslexic or anything like that. I suspect I am, because words, they don't map to notions to me, whereas a graphic does map to a notion. As a result, the LabVIEW language, I could dive into it and it just made sense to me. Data flow programming, it enabled me to do things. Now, how did I learn the syntax itself? Well, one of the reasons why I like LabVIEW as much as I do is because there's lots of help about the syntax built into the IDE. I know we're going to be probably talking about context help, but the way I learned LabVIEW was by using context help and trying different concepts, dreaming, and then asking the language, how do I do a thing? And with context help, I was able to figure it out. So there was a lot of try and fail. There was a gentleman at National Instruments who was very generous with his knowledge, and I'd say, oh, here, I got it to work. And he'd say, ooh, let me introduce you to this notion called a cluster. It could make your life a lot easier. Oh, and now to point, you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know the right terms, and so you don't know what you don't know. Having somebody else's eyes on it is really, really important. Now, what do I wish that I'd had? So I think that a lot's changed since, I think 2003, 2004, when I started. I would say one of the most impactful things is tools like VI Package Manager, the notion of code that's already developed that I can get my hands on. VI Package Manager is one of the means by which the community can package up and redistribute codes so that we're not starting from scratch. That's one thing. I wish that had been in place. Something tells me it's probably in its infancy. The second thing, and I'll shut up after this, whenever you'd start a new program in LabVIEW, there was this notion of blank VI syndrome. You get this white screen, and where do you start? There was nothing to support you. And so you had to start from scratch every time. Now, there are these sample projects, these beginning starting points that you can begin to fill in, and those ship with LabVIEW. And there's tons of community frameworks that you can start from versus starting from scratch and making all of the mistakes that you don't even know that you're making. I wish that had been in place when I first learned.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I can go back and think about one of my sub-VIs that I created early in the day. I connected a wire to every single input. Which brings us to the quiz question. How many inputs can you actually connect to a sub-VI? And at that point, it was 28, and I had 28, and it was a monster.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to turn this over, Mark, to hear about your experience. And I want to bring in something, Chris, that you said, because it's so important. And that is the visual nature of LabVIEW. And when I was first learning LabVIEW, I couldn't get it. This whole data flow thing, and understanding that data flow determines the order of execution, I really struggled to grasp that when I was first learning LabVIEW. But once the light bulb hits, then it was like, oh, this is obvious, and this is how I think. And because of the graphical nature of LabVIEW, I can do code reviews in probably 60 seconds for a quick code review. And the other thing is, I remember what people's code looks like, because that's that image that's in my brain. So I'm with you. I could not look through text and code in a text-based language. That's how my brain works. But that light bulb has to go on, and when it does, it's pretty powerful. So so Mark, tell us a little bit about your learning LabVIEW as well, and what was missing when you were learning LabVIEW.
All right. Well, first I'll say that 28 terminal connector still exists on the connector, and I discourage people from using it as much as possible. But we have a lot of commonalities among us all here on the panel as far as how we came into being LabVIEW and what we used it for. There's a space connection here. I started off working as an associate electrical systems engineer at NASA Kennedy Space Center. That's where I wrote my first LabVIEW program back in 1994. I think it was version 3.1.1. And we were using it to control some ground support equipment. And they let me choose which language I wanted to do it in, and I picked LabVIEW. And as with what Chris and Nancy mentioned, I didn't excel at text-based programming either. But when I saw LabVIEW, things just made sense because they looked like what they represented. So for me, and as you said, the graphical nature of LabVIEW was the key to turning me into a software person. So I've been lucky enough to run with that for a while. As far as actual learning it, I attended the available NI training courses as well. Q mentioned the LabVIEW Basics and Advanced, I think it was called back then. And then I also took advantage of subscribing to LabVIEW Technical Resource. You all remember that? LTR, where they would send you the floppy disk with the code examples on it. So I did that. That was really valuable. I got a lot of knowledge from that. And so, a similar path to everybody else. But these days, we have a lot more information available to everybody, with the internet and everything being connected. And none of that stuff was around back when I first started LabVIEW. But with all the information proliferating out there, the challenge now for new users is being able to sift through all that information and find the nuggets of gold that are out there, right? As you really have to take things kind of with a grain of salt, who's putting that stuff out and the quality of it. So there's some good stuff out there, though.
So we're going to take what you just said there and shift a little bit to that specific topic and the fact that we have so much information out there for learning LabVIEW. You can find videos in so many different locations, not just on YouTube. And then there's blogs and there's community page. And so there's a sense of you kind of have to develop a little bit of wisdom on getting to know the community and getting to know some of the community leaders and really discerning how you want to do courses. So I taught a lot of courses back in the day, and the value that I felt like I derived and the customers derived was having an instructor physically there who should have the answers. I still would get questions that I don't know the answer to, but I do know the answer to how many connectors you could get on a icon is 28. So I would always learn something, but it was always something valuable. I felt like having that instructor in the classroom. And so with all of that, the options out there, and there's some very good complementary options, where do the NI courses fit in? And somebody might say, well, I don't have time to go sit for instructor-led training. Or somebody might have trouble really justifying the expense to their boss. I think instructor-led training is always the best option. But a boss could come back and say, well, Nancy, there's so many YouTube videos over here. Why don't you just go learn that at lunchtime? So Mark, you instruct on a regular basis. Hundreds of people have come through your courses. Help us understand a little bit about how you see the value of the NI courses and what you can bring in to those courses as a regular instructor.
All right, thanks. That's a great lead in for the topic. And anybody that knows or follows me, as Nancy mentioned, you know that I'm teaching courses for NI all the time, and I'm very biased towards the NI courses. I will admit that. I lean towards those official training courses. And the reason I do so is because since the beginning, NI has recognized the value of training its customers to use their platform. And they've been offering training courses since at least the 1980s. Over the time, NI has continued to evolve their courses and their training offerings as the software evolved and as the changes to underlying computing technologies evolved. So that's a big plus in my book on the side of the official NI training courses. And as a result of that, NI now offers a very wide range of LabVIEW training courses and other courses as well to suit every need and experience level. So that's where I, am coming from. I believe that the NI courses are the best entry ramp into the LabVIEW learning experience. Now, when we talk about some of the many other training and learning options that are available, a lot of those came about as a result of like what Nancy mentioned, that people didn't necessarily want to sit for a week of training and miss work. So there's other options out there that are available. But again, I will say that some of those other options, they aren't necessarily going to be backed by NI's long history of evolution and updates. Many of them that I'm aware of, they don't incorporate the use of NI hardware. and they don't have the high level of support that you get from being backed by the entire NI Education Services organization. And I think those are traits that really set the official NI training apart from any other training that's out there in the market.
Ooh, can I add one more thing?
Please do.
So I think something else that sets NI training apart from most other training that's out there, the NI training not only familiarizes you with the syntax of the language, like the data types, but it also teaches you concepts in programming itself. Like, how do you use these data types and when should you choose the right one for your application? And there's an emphasis on your application. Like, if you have a signal like blah, 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 then you might want to program this way. So there's a very holistic approach to the training, well beyond just the tool. It's the tool and how to use it with your application.
Excellent point. And I will also add, just from my own personal side of things, I think that the fact that not only am I a seasoned instructor of official NI content, but also since I work in the field as a consultant, that I bring that to the classroom as well. And that's not something you can get necessarily from an online training or watching a video or just reading about it. So I think that having that in-person aspect is key. And I see that a lot of the learning actually happens in the spaces between me going through PowerPoint slides, right? Just conversations passing on break or over lunch where somebody mentions a problem they're facing in the code that they're working on at work, and we'll kick off a whole conversation. And I encourage that in my trainings. I would rather learn that way than just with me providing information through the PowerPoints.
Yeah, I think you hit on the really key aspect there, and that's that personal connection to someone who has mastered the topic, and you have the wisdom, because as soon as we get from understanding here's how a while loop works and here's how a for loop works, then I have to make a design decision about what I'm going to use. In a moment, Q, I want to come to you and some of the training that you guys do at Tesseract. But before we pivot over there, Chris, you had a great analogy when we were talking earlier in the green room today. And you have the analogy of language and poetry.
Yeah.
So could you expand on that just a little bit?
That whenever somebody says, hey, how do you program? I think oftentimes it's easy to conflate two notions that I think is worthwhile separating. And the analogy, like you were saying, Nancy, is anytime you learn a language, there's two components to it. There's the syntax of the language, like subject-verb agreement, and the structure of a sentence. Like, you have to know that in order to speak. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you know the language, or you can use the language. And the analogy would be, you understand the syntax of the language, but that doesn't make you a poet. There's the artistry, there's the expression of notions using the language to accomplish the end goal. And that's a whole other set of training, knowledge, and experience that I think follows on gaining a sense of expertise with the tool itself. I can't master poetry until I have a pretty good foundation in the language itself.
And Q, I want to pass it over to you, Q, because that's the segue into Tesseract has done a great job now of teaching poetry for LabVIEW. So take the stage, my friend.
Well, before I bring up what Tesseract is doing, I just wanted to say I agree with Mark as training is a good front door, and that was the front door for me even. But I might disagree a little bit, just where I think that there is so much that the community has that is good. I mean, there's great books out there that community members have written. There's great blogs out there that, and maybe that's the difference is going through training is a good way to start learning the language and get familiar, and maybe even write simple poetry. I don't know. Yeah. But to really start on a specific project, then you need to start asking those questions and going and finding the answers among the members of the community. And to bring in what my company is doing, Tesseract, we found that individual teams and test organizations have a challenge that there has not been a standardized method for automated test. We have experiences working with hundreds of test organizations, leading test teams, and creating a curriculum for creating training and real world and world-class automated test teams. We set the standard across 6 disciplines of test organizations, software practices, hardware practices, processes, team organization, project management, and career development. So one of the things that we really try to bring to the table is we want to help, and this is something we talked about in the green room too, is you bring in a new engineer into a test organization and you assign a mentor to them. Well, now that mentor's got to give up some of his time being productive on a project to help his mentee. His mentee might not feel like he's getting the attention that he needs. So one of the things that TestDirect does, and it's through something that we call Test Point Academy. If you go to testdirect.com and then go down the screen, you can click on Test Point Academy and contact us about it. But Test Point Academy, we become that mentor for your employee, and we lead them through a process of growth, both learning LabVIEW, learning test stand, but more so just becoming a test engineer, learning how to test something thoroughly. So,
and that's what I love about the community and our ecosystem, because NI cannot create every course for every scenario. And so we really focus on making sure our customers learn the product well, reasonably within the context of how they're going to use the product. And Chris, you brought that up. But there are so many other aspects of developing these complex software solutions. When we were building testers in 1989 and 90, we were just taking temperature measurements once a second and putting it on a graph and maybe save it to a file. And so it was really simple, and things are much more complex now. And even as our software becomes more complex, we need to understand how to do good software development with standard CI/CD tools. And a lot of us as engineers, we learn hardware and then we're learning software, and we're learning software practices at the same time. So I love what TestDirect has done. You guys can provide the entire test engineering experience and the right mentors, and that has so much value to the customers. We also have a team called DSH Workshops, which stands for Delacorp, SSDC, and then Handful Software Engineering. And some of our veterans have a workshop style format on the narrow piece of learning software and software development. How should I do my unit testing at my company? And how can I really get closer to a full CI/CD process? And so they will come on site and work with your team, and they may have one person on site and a couple people virtual, but you're able to learn from mentors on how to do your software development process. There's also SAS workshops. Sam Taggart has a lot of different courses that are very, very targeted. And I know I'm going to miss other people out there. There's a group called SixClear that has done some training, and they do a lot in the Albuquerque area. And so that's what's so exciting, is having this ecosystem out there. And I think the challenge for us as a community is, how do we better get the word out and give people a little bit of direction? It's like, if you can take that instructor-led training, do it. That becomes that critical foundation, and then everything else builds upon it. Because if I've taken the course and then 3 months later, I need to refresh something, well, I'm going to go over to the LabVIEW wiki and find something out. We'll take a look at the LabVIEW wiki in a moment. But while we're still on this topic, Chris, you've also been really involved, and Q, you guys have both been involved in starting up LabVIEW Center of Excellence teams. And Chris, you've got some great templates and tools to really scale this type of offering for a customer. So you want to spend a little bit of time on that, because all of us are going to be really kind of going down one or two paths. Either I'm going to come out of school, I'm going to learn a little bit of LabVIEW, and I'm going to go work for my friend go work for Joe Helms over in Florida, and he already has a framework, and he's going to teach me how to use LabVIEW to build a couple measurements, and I learned that. And then I go off and I'm going to go do something else, and LabVIEW might not be part of my future. And then some of us stay in test engineering and do system engineering, and then LabVIEW really becomes our core foundational tool. And over time, we become really solid developers and architects. When we're down that path, and we're working with a team, that's where things like LabVIEW Center of Excellence and good CI/CD, and for those of you that don't know the term, continuous integration, continuous delivery, those things become real important. And so, Chris, you want to take a couple moments just to speak on that?
Yeah, first thing I want to point out is that oftentimes LabVIEW is, I've heard said, it's not a real programming language. You can't do things like continuous integration. It's a lie. LabVIEW lets you do things like continuous integration, continuous delivery, and good software engineering practices, as well as good software development practices. For those of you who don't know what the Center of Excellence is, it's a qualification given by NI to say, you, company, you're doing it right. So there's this audit that you go through to see, do you have the correct best practices in place? Are you building a good team? Does your software behave as it should, et cetera, et cetera? So while I was at Cirrus Logic for about 3 years, I worked with Nancy and Cirrus to put together the Center of Excellence, which meant putting good documentation, processes, and procedures in place so that everybody knew, how do I do software? And this is part of the distinguishment between software development and software engineering. Software development is the writing of the code. The software engineering is all the process surrounding the code's development, distribution, maintenance, handoff ability, et cetera, et cetera. So putting a Center of Excellence in place and walking through this audit from NI is a fantastic way for an organization to know, am I doing it right? Cool. Well, how do I even start? One of the things that I've developed is a template, and I've implemented it inside of Atlassian's Confluence, but there's lots of different ways that you can implement it, that puts some structure in place so that people know what to fill out and where is the plan. That's what this template is designed to kind of help out with.
I love it. Excellent. Before we shift a little bit into the uniquenesses of learning LabVIEW as a language, is there anything else that Mark, Q, that you guys wanted to share kind of with regards to learning LabVIEW and the resources that are available today?
Well, maybe. I think the best thing is just get yourself a project. You know,
Yes.
You can't, I mean, you can learn the syntax all day long, but until you have something that you have an end goal of trying to accomplish, you need that in order to really learn how it all goes together, you know.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring up a point here. I'm going to let you guys expand on it a little bit, but let me give the illustration that I saw, Quentin, when I was teaching courses. There was a group, it was the US Olympic Center down in Colorado Springs, here in Colorado, and they got budget to take training before they got budget to actually buy LabVIEW. And that is completely backwards. And so does somebody here, Mark or Chris or Q, want to talk a little bit about the LabVIEW Community Edition?
Let Chris take that one.
I get really excited about this.
Before you take it, Chris, one last thing I want to say is on getting a project, one of the things that we do for our new engineers that come on, just as an idea, is we get them to program some little game, you know, program a game for us. You know, sometimes it's Minesweeper, sometimes it's tic-tac-toe, sometimes it's, you know, blackjack or something, just to give them some goal to practice on. Okay, sorry, I'll turn this.
No, I love that. That's great. Speaking of which, I think we're going to have a summer of LabVIEW, and it will be public, and it will be some kind of game or something. I don't know all the details, but we will talk about that on LinkedIn and our community page once we have more information. But it's in that spirit of, let's go have fun with this language and build something cool.
Right. Oh man. So
Chris, Community Edition.
Yeah. Speaking of building
in 2 minutes or less. How about? Can you do it?
Time me. All right. So up until I think it was 2020, In order for you to get your hands on LabVIEW, you either would download it as an evaluation version or you had to pay for it. And that didn't facilitate somebody just trying it and being able to build something over the long term. NI has opened the floodgates, if you will, with this release in 2020 called LabVIEW Community Edition. It is the full, unfettered development environment. And it is the professional version. I believe it also includes application builder, if memory serves, plus lots of other things. And the only ask is it's for non-commercial use. Outside of that, download it, have a field day. And every time LabVIEW gets revved, the community edition gets revved. So all the new features that are coming along with LabVIEW, the entire community gets it. You can get your hands on LabVIEW now, and it is not the pared down version. I can't emphasize that enough. As a result, to Quentin's point, now you can come up with an idea, whatever it is, a game, maybe you want to control a Raspberry Pi to do, I don't know, build a wall clock that looks like something you might have in Harry Potter. I don't know who anybody's done that, Quentin, right? And now the sky is the limit. So go download something, come up with an idea, and then dream. That's one of the biggest things that I can say. Dream, and then figure out how to make that dream a reality with LabVIEW. My experience has been LabVIEW lets you dream and turn your thoughts into reality. I could talk about that for a long time, but only got 2 minutes. Okay, thanks, bye.
You did a great job. I wish I had more time to go do the dream and come up with some kind of a cooking app and do more programming in LabVIEW. Now that my kids are out of the house, maybe I can get some of those things done and go do some of those fun projects. I digress. What I want to come back to is I like what you said about the dream. And Mark, you started talking about your experience at NASA. And before we get up on this topic, you know, Chris, I think you might have a little tidbit excitement news to share in a moment. But LabVIEW is different from all of these other languages. We talked about this earlier because LabVIEW was designed to interface to hardware. A program in LabVIEW is called a VI. It has a .vi extension, and that stands for virtual instrument. And so, you know, instead of having all these benchtop instruments, all you need is a good, you know, digitizer or signal, bring it in, and then you could do anything with that data in LabVIEW. And the other nice thing about LabVIEW is it's easy for me to build some quick R&D type applications, some really quick design work without having to have significant experience in software. So I can build some quick things. And then when I need to build something larger, I need to make sure there's an architect that's part of my practice or part of what we're working on. And it was really fun. I was talking to one of our dear friends, Stephen Loftus-Mercer, who has been at NI for decades and probably, you know, he's been on the LabVIEW R&D team and one of the best presenters. So if you're ever at NI Connect or any GDevCon, take a moment to hear from Stephen. He's brilliant. And so Stephen, who helped build LabVIEW to what it is today, is now using LabVIEW at SpaceX. And we were talking, and it's like, wait a minute, LabVIEW's been very critical to SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Orbit, Firefly, NASA, and a lot of these spaceflight companies. And so, and what's so fun for all of us as engineers that have participated in one way or another is we're not just writing software for a web front end or a back end. We're writing software that launches a rocket, that tests solid rocket boosters and makes a huge impact. And that is what is so fun about being an engineer and having this tool like LabVIEW to facilitate all the amazingness that's been going on. But it is LabVIEW's different. It is graphical in nature, and some people like myself, it took a while to understand data flow. And then Quentin, you also brought up the important part is with LabVIEW, I'm not just building a web front end, and I'm not just reading barcodes and displaying information for my team. I have to interface with hardware. So I will let either one of you start off, and maybe Mark, you can share the experiences the students have when they're doing instructor-led training and they have actual hardware, Quentin, I know you'll have some stories, and Chris too. And in a minute, we'll take a look at the LabVIEW wiki and see that nice little translator of, text-based terminology to LabVIEW, which I think is fantastic. But before we get to the community sites and everything, whoever wants to kick off, talk a little bit about how LabVIEW is different as it relates to learning programming and then learning how to write beautiful poetry.
I could jump in on that, I guess, first. Obviously, as we all know, the graphical paradigm of LabVIEW is what sets it apart. And for me, that's what enabled me to turn a corner on software. I didn't enjoy doing text-based languages in college, but when I saw LabVIEW, that was like flipping a switch on, and everything just made sense. Like Nancy mentioned, you can look at something and understand what it represents and what the concept is. And as an instructor, I hear a lot of people and students, they have a bad impression of LabVIEW when they first come into the training. They think that it's just like a toy. It's not a real programming language. You can't really do anything sophisticated with it. And I like being the person to debunk a lot of that. By the time they get done the training, they have changed their idea about graphical programming. In fact, a couple of years ago, after one class, a few months later, I got an email from a student, and he was really combative in the training. He was like, I don't like LabVIEW because X, Y, Z, and I had to answer all these objections during the training, which I did. Well, he emailed me back saying, you totally changed my opinion of graphical programming. Thanks for the course. And that was really satisfying to hear. And I've heard it on a few occasions. So it is the fact that it's graphical that makes it more easy to use. It's intuitive. You can do things quicker, like Nancy mentioned. And so the main takeaway for me is, I'd say LabVIEW itself, just by nature of what it is and how it's designed, helps to shorten the learning curve for people, right? So you can get up and running to do your project and focus on what you really need to get done very quickly.
Thanks for sharing that. It's always interesting to have that combative student, and I had one of those, and who is now a very prolific partner and doing a great job in LabVIEW. So we like hearing those stories. So many stories from the classroom.
So one of the
What
things
else?
that
Chris, I know you're chomping at the bit, and Q, you've got some ideas. So keep going,
yeah,
gentlemen.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I was able to sell to a lot of program managers when I was in the Air Force was the ability to connect to hardware a lot easier. Sometimes, for some devices, yeah, you do have to get into the nitty gritty and to develop the driver where you're talking serial and you have to send the device specific commands. But for a lot of hardware, there's already LabVIEW drivers built. And then it's as simple as dropping down an init, dropping down a configure, dropping down a read, dropping down a close, and then you put a loop around the read, and now it's reading data from that device. For a lot of devices, it's that simple. And that's one of the things, Plug Tester Act, again, we have a really good hardware abstraction layer that we've developed that talks to a lot of devices. And so for companies that don't want to go off and try to develop their own drivers, we have a lot of stuff developed for a lot of different devices. But the graphical nature of LabVIEW is, if you're going to write a text-based program, what does every engineer do first? They draw a flow chart. They're like, okay, I need to do this, and then it needs to go to this, then it needs to go to this. Well, LabVIEW, with its data flow, it is the flow chart. So you drop a block, this is your initialization, and then you wire data, and then it goes to the read, and then you get done with the program and it goes to the close. It is the flow chart. It's easier. Engineers don't know it, but they're already programming in LabVIEW on paper first before they go write it in text.
I like that.
Okay, ready?
Ready.
So I want to restate using different words what both Mark and Quentin have already said, because I think everybody processes information differently. We've been talking about the graphical nature of programming or of LabVIEW and how that enables. I submit these words: LabVIEW behaves like the world. LabVIEW behaves like the world. Now, what Quentin was just saying is, as engineers, we already have a way of talking about the world. We have block diagrams, or we drop down different graphics that represent activities, and then we tie these activities together with wires. Well, what's going on here? The world is inherently parallel. It's not inherently serial. Block diagrams help us represent this parallel activity. LabVIEW is inherently parallel. It behaves like the world. As a result, we can interact with the real world much easier than we can with constructs that are inherently serial, like top-down execution of a programming language, of a text-based programming language. And we can make text-based programming languages be parallel, but it takes extra. LabVIEW, it's parallel out of the box. And so we can do simple things like control a singular instrument, or we can do things like, test an entire rocket. And this is where I get really, really excited. One of the cool things that just happened, DMC was awarded, here, I'll unblur my background, the project with Northrop Grumman to test the NASA SLS boosters. And that's so exciting. The reason why I want to mention this is because this is complex. In fact, I just announced this on LinkedIn last night. One of the very first questions I got was, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have? And I'm already starting to think through how to answer that. But I would say, in short, LabVIEW lets us do complex things by virtue of its ability to connect with hardware and control that hardware in the same way that the world behaves in parallel. And you don't have to do anything extra. That's its beauty. And I think that we take that notion and we frame it oftentimes as data flow. It's the same idea. Or as graphical programming, same idea. It just behaves like the world. Okay,
congrats. I am absolutely thrilled for you guys. And it's going to be so fun to watch you guys on that journey. And just for our audience here, we did not know about this space connection that ties all of us together until right now. And I never really worked for another company other than NI or National Instruments, but I've worked with all of our spaceflight companies over the years. And so it's really exciting to see that. I want to kind of go off on a little tangent here, because I like, Chris, how you mentioned that LabVIEW behaves as the world behaves. And we're in a world where digital transformation is the buzzword, overloaded term, and everything is about moving data. And data originates at a sensor. Well, actually, the data starts when we configure a measurement to be a specific type of measurement. So the data goes into some kind of an instrument or a device. Then we pull the data out, and then the data goes and gets analyzed. So the data is moving through this parallel system. And then the data might get pushed out to a different service or into the cloud. And so I think it's really fun that we've already, or thank you, Jeff K. We didn't, Jeff K. and many other people did, develop this whole paradigm of programming that is driven by data itself. And so do either of you want to expand on that a little bit? We're gonna push our conversation kind of to the community here in just a moment, but I wanted to stay on the topic of LabVIEW and LabVIEW as a language, just to see if there was anything else you guys wanted to bring in at this point.
Just one thing, the fact that you said, yeah, we get in data from an instrument and then it gets analyzed and then whatever. The parallel nature is it's not just one instrument, it's 1,000 instruments. We're getting data from all of them. We have to correlate that data and learn what we can from that data. So that's why the parallel nature is so necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Excellent. Any other comments before we shift a little bit? So we've covered how we all learned LabVIEW, talked a little bit about the different ways to learn LabVIEW, a little bit about how LabVIEW is different. And another key piece of the LabVIEW journey is learning about our community and becoming involved in our community. I'm going to plug, we have NI Connect is coming up in May. And that's our event in Austin, Texas. That's where NI is headquartered. For those of you that don't know, it's headquartered in Austin. And speaking of Austin, I'm going to go off on a rabbit trail here for a moment, because I was going to share my little fun fact here. And so my fun fact about Austin, Texas is that I am Texas royalty. And my great uncle was Stephen Fuller Austin, who is known as the father of Texas because he helped settle the state of Texas. He's who the, of course, Austin, Texas is named for. And this might be a little bit morbid, but you know, the family burial plots are about 50 yards from where Stephen F. Austin and his sister were buried. So supposedly, you know, Stephen F. Austin gave all these big pieces of land to people to come settle in Texas. And I'm still looking for my plot of land that is either on a lake or has a bunch of oil under it. Haven't found it yet, but that's my fun Austin connection. And so I'm true blue Texan, even though I live in Colorado and will eventually move to Tennessee. So that being said, let's shift a little bit into the community. And so we've already talked a little bit about some of the things in the community and some of the toolboxes that we have. And so I'm going to let you gentlemen speak to a couple of things, and then I'm going to run in the background here and do a little bit of screen sharing. And maybe we kick off with G Central. And Chris, talk a little bit about the analogy to PyPy and kind of how that was a little bit of an inspiration into G Central.
You bet. So G Central is the first, but not only LabVIEW community, but nonprofit organization. We were originally inspired by PyPy.org, where our goal was, this is a summarized thesis statement, to do for the LabVIEW community what PyPy.org has done for Python, which is to catalog reuse libraries and then expose them out to the LabVIEW community so that everybody can find and use each other's code, so that everybody can contribute code for others to find, and ideally so that everybody can collaborate on that code together. The idea is G Central wants to enable the LabVIEW community to make the best version of itself versus having to rely on any external factor. So G Central was put in place to make that a reality. Since G Central's inception, a lot of really cool things have happened, not the least of which is VI Package Manager's VIPM.io is now a fantastic community repo, and G Central is doing additional things now beyond just this find and use each other's code. We want to enable the community to fund each other and startup initiatives. So one of the cool things that G Central is doing is this notion of the G Idea Exchange. So at this stage, anybody out in the world can in effect use G Central as a Kickstarter so that we can start to develop community code and we can maybe fund it. So community funded, community led, community distributed. So that's just one of the things that G Central is doing. One of the really cool things about G Central, we want to enable the LabVIEW community to make the best version of itself, which of course means tooling, but it also means connecting with other folks. If you go to the community resources, our hope is that this is your landing page for all of the different tentacles that go out into the different community resources. And so, Nancy, if you keep on scrolling down, so first off, there's the LabVIEW Community Edition if you want it. But there, underneath the LabVIEW Community Edition, you've got things like links to the LabVIEW Architect virtual forums. You've got links to the community-led events like GDevCon. You've got links to the LabVIEW Wiki, et cetera, et cetera. So the community, I would say, because of everything that you see here, is vibrant, is excited, is growing, and there's tremendous potential, and there is tremendous room for more growth. If there's anything that we need, it's everybody in the world to be contributing, to be looking at each other's code, to be learning from each other, to be contributing in these discussion forums. G Central was put in place to that exact end.
Fantastic. Hugh, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, just as you mentioned earlier with the Summer of LabVIEW, that's actually with NI's help, that's one of the events G Central is trying to put on, and specifically the GID Exchange Committee is trying to put on. And so what that event is going to be is a while back, another company called Ndigit developed a game called Square Battle. And the fun part of that game is it's not like a live person-to-person game. You program an AI, essentially. You program your own squares to attack other people's squares. And the point of the game is to try to take over as much of the board as possible. And it so it really is a programmer's game. We are going to have resources to tell you how to program it and how to plug into it. And then you essentially send us your square and we battle it against everybody else that contributed squares. So that's going to be a really fun event. More details will be coming about that soon. So,
and for people out there that were looking for that dream or that project to get started with LabVIEW, this is a great opportunity. And you can go download the LabVIEW Community Edition to do it. It's all free.
mm-hmm.
And I would add that I do promote the community edition as well, and not enough people know about it. And once they find out, they're rushing out to download it, which is great. As far as the community goes, I'll just point out that NI has always been community focused all the way from the early days. And that was great. That helped drive adoption of the platform, and it provided a place where developers of all levels can engage with each other, learn from each other. And there are some key individuals out there. If you go onto the LabVIEW community for any amount of time, you'll start to recognize the names and avatars of certain users who really go above and beyond to help other people. And they're not asking for anything in return, except for maybe a kudo here and there.
Right.
But they go above and beyond. And it's a really vibrant and active community, and it really does set NI apart in the market. Also, I'm glad to see, though, now that the community is kind of expanding beyond the realm of NI. It's being picked up by people that are doing their own thing and driving it even further. So that's all great stuff.
Yeah, and I have to at least plug the LabVIEW Graphical Programming Edition that came out in 2019. And Fabiola de la Cueva is one of our very, very prolific and fun and vocal members of the community, and she contributed to that. Terry has contributed to the FPGA book. There's a variety of other books out here. And also look up the name Steve Watts when you are on Amazon looking for LabVIEW content. The DSH workshop team is starting to drop some small booklets in Amazon. Very awesome, good practical advice there as well.
And another front door that I want to plug is on the LabVIEW Wiki. The LabVIEW Wiki has a getting started page that not just myself, but a dozen or so other LabVIEW champions helped contribute to and tried to organize it in a way that could help you get started. One of the best things about this page is actually down a little lower in the additional learning resources. Yeah, we can show that page in just a minute, but like the list of blogs and the books and online videos and all of those things are contributed to by just hundreds of community members. So this is like the resource I wish I had, was being able to have all of these blogs and videos to go to after I had gotten through that training front door. And then another thing is there's a lot of people that are avid programmers but don't know LabVIEW. And so I created this page, and other people can add on to it. But this is kind of a terminology definition between a text-based term and the LabVIEW, or the G term, which is the technical name of the LabVIEW language. G for graphical. And so, you know, for example, in text-based languages, you have a struct. In G, you have a cluster. In yeah, one thing that's interesting to note is a while loop in text-based is a do while, where a for loop is, you know, a for loop. So, you know, just to help people along to make that transition if they're already an avid programmer.
Yeah, this is having this and then having the option for all of us to contribute to this is fantastic. Something we should have done many, many years ago. We've got a few more minutes here. There's a couple more things I know we want to take a quick look at. One of them as well is the, if you go straight to the NI site, you can go to community, and then once you're in the community, you can find out about local user groups in your area. And, you know, post-pandemic, a lot of these groups were starting to meet again. We had our first Colorado meeting a couple months ago, and there's always something to learn. And there's always something that you learn when you can be in person. And so we have a lot of our user groups that used to meet maybe in the Pacific Northwest, Texas, Detroit are kicking back up again and starting to meet on a regular basis. And it gets to what, Mark, you were saying. There's a lot that I'm going to learn from a user group or watching a presentation, but if I can be in the room when, for instance, Ben is presenting on some object-oriented topics, I can watch everybody else in the room and see who's getting it and not getting it. And there's just some dynamics there that make that whole experience richer when we're in person. And of course, the best conversations are the conversations in between the sessions, either before the session or after the session, where we can dive deeper and get to understand a piece of technology better than we might otherwise have if we weren't there in person. So a lot of these user groups will also broadcast, like the Midlands LabVIEW user group that's in the UK, and I know they do online and offline. Over Alarm is in Colorado, and right now we're just doing in person. But come over here to the community site and find a group. And if you have any questions, there's various places where you can just reach out to one of the members of our community team. And if it's user group related or event related, those emails eventually land on my desk as well. So I wanted to make sure we promoted and shared the community. And there's a lot of other things here on the community, but as far as different discussion forums on different products, if you got questions on LabVIEW, you got questions on SystemLink, Test Stand, there's a lot of different forums here where you can learn and get some questions answered. And so I'm really excited. The community team is going to be working with our very good site as it is today and making it even better and elevating it a little bit. So if I'm going to stop sharing, and I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the LabVIEW examples, but before we kind of close out with that, I think we have a few minutes left. Maybe I'll just pull that up real quickly. Let me do the screen share again and pull up the LabVIEW examples, and then we can close this out. But one of the things that you guys reminded me about, and that was in LabVIEW, one of the best things that we forget about, and I think it was Doug Norman that did a lot of the work behind there are so many fantastic examples that ship with LabVIEW. And there's not necessarily a getting started folder here, but if you open up the example finder from the help menu, you can come down to fundamentals, and then you'll have plenty of examples so that you can learn about clusters before programming without them, and learning about arrays and LabVIEW and data structures and everything else. And so
not showing your screen if you're meaning to.
Oh, guys, thank you. I'm not showing my screen. Okay, let's come back over here. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot to hit the share button. Oops. Okay, there we go. Now I'm sharing my screen.
There we go.
Yeah, so there's under fundamentals here, you've got a variety of different topics to go pull up some examples, some basic examples. And I will, if I close this window, what's that?
Just show where to find that again.
Yeah. Okay, I got to do this again. There always has, I've been doing so many technical presentations for so long, there always has to be a technical glitch at some point. So we just hit our technical glitch here. Nancy doesn't know how to share a screen. All right, let's come back to.
I want to point out doing that. Well, that list of examples, that's not concepts, that's code. So
Yes, thank you.
it demonstrates it.
And you get to it, you come to, you got the front panel open, go to help, go to find examples, boom. It's going to load and show up in a moment. There we go. My laptop is always slow when I'm doing Zoom and Teams calls. And then we go down to fundamentals.
Still not
And
showing.
as Chris said,
Not showing. It's not showing.
Not drawing.
oh, it's not showing. Okay,
So we're seeing.
But that's okay. We did see that part.
Yep.
So
we saw that.
I just wanted to make sure that people saw where to find it. So, but like Chris said, that's not just fundamentals. That's not just reading a help file. That actually brings up code, and you can look at the code, you can run it, you can turn on highlight execution and see how it runs, all of that stuff. So
Use Control H, your context help to figure out what do all these different graphics mean.
Yep. So, oh, Chris, you froze there for a sec.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying, use Control H to hover over all the graphics in these examples to learn what they do, what they mean.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, we are at time. And as we close out, I would love each one of you to take your 15 seconds of that last bit of advice to anybody who is joining us here today and everyone who's in the chat and asking all the questions. I will close this out. So 15 seconds of advice to all of our attendees today.
I'll go.
go first.
Dream. Have something that you care about that you want to implement, and then do it in LabVIEW. And then once you've done it, dream more, add more to it. If you can, yes, you want to use LabVIEW for your work, totally. But if there's something that's meaningful to you, like a recipe organizer, build it. Just dream with LabVIEW, have fun.
Awesome. Dream with LabVIEW, have fun. Mark Q, who's up next to close out?
Like Chris said, I had fun learning how to use LabVIEW with a Raspberry Pi, something that I'd never done before. Being a big Harry Potter fan, I made a clock that tracks my family, like the if you're familiar with the books, the Weasleys had. So it's my Weasley clock. And so, you know, it was a brand new concept to me, and I learned a lot, you know, of how to do, you know, serial communication, how to control servos, how to, you know, all sorts of stuff. I even have lights on it. So I learned how to control lights, you know, LED lights. So it was really fun. I always find, especially when you're getting started, find a fun project you're passionate about to learn from.
That's awesome. I think you need to possibly package and sell some of your LabVIEW Harry Potter games and tools. So, Mark, I know you got to head off to finish teaching a course this morning. So share with us your 15 seconds of wisdom.
Yeah, I'd just say the key is to start from a solid foundation of knowledge and best practices and build on that. If you don't have a solid foundation, anything you build on top of that is not going to be solid and sturdy. So take training, learn, and apply what you learn in those courses.
Yeah, we don't want to build our houses on sand. We want to build them on solid foundations. That's really important. I'm going to close this out. As I mentioned earlier, I am Nancy Henson. I've been doing this LabVIEW thing for way too many decades. I still love it. My passion as the head of developer relations is I love helping others, engineers in particular, have that aha moment of now I get it. And so I know Mark shares that joy when you're teaching a class and all of a sudden the students are starting to get the concepts and it makes sense. And so in my role, whatever I can do to help us grow our user groups, empower our community, expand our events so that we get more engineers programming in LabVIEW, having those aha moments, building the next generation of space travel and automotive travel and everything else. That really is, that's my passion. That's the passion, I think, of all of us here. I want to thank you, Mark, and Q and Chris. This has been really a ton of fun, I think, for all of us this morning or this afternoon, whatever time zone you happen to be in. So thank you for joining us for how to learn LabVIEW from beginner to advanced. And this is our orientation from the experts. Thank you.
You.